Excellent. Hello, Barry. We're back together. With me is Barry Goodman of Birkdale Transition Advisors. And Barry and I have finished Discover Together with his client, Janice. And today we're going to go through the deep dive analysis. We'll start with, we'll do approximately 1 hour of questions in the deep dive analysis and get into them in detail. So I'm logged into my dashboard and I'm going to open up prospects. We see Janice Strong here, and we're going to click on Start the Deep Dive Analysis. We can also click on Janice's name, and here we see a prospect detail. Here's the information that Janice gave us. There's her name, the stage she's at inside the CoreValue software, business name, Strong Distributors, which is a distribution company, and we can access some information here. We can access her Discover report, which we walked through in detail during our last meeting. We can view her driver report. Click on driver report, and this shows Strong Distributors, all 18 of their growth and equity value drivers benchmarked against their peers. The blue bars are Strong Distributors, and the gray bar are their peers, people in the same industry, other distribution companies. And so you can see at a glance, in the Discover report, we see which are the top 3 contributors to the value gap on a weighted basis calculated by the software. In this view, we can see all 18 of the value drivers without any weighting, a simple comparison. So customer satisfaction, you'll see that there is no bar. That's because Janice told us that they don't do any work in customer satisfaction. They have no idea. Senior management, same issue. They are at the lowest rating. So this is a great place for advisors to go and say, what else did we learn about the company? And as we're starting to think ahead of the deep dive analysis, how does the company compare? We also have some information, revenues of $50 million, EBITDA of $1 million, a low margin business at 2%. They have a core value business rating of 43.8. 43.8, you can think of the analogy would be a confidence rating. We can be 44%, rounding up, 44% confident in this company's ability to generate revenue and profit going into the future, okay? Or 44% confident in this company's ability to successfully go through an M&A transaction. So this is a terrific number for helping your client understand in context where they are. Okay, I'm going to click back here, and we can also click this Invite to Deep Dive button. So I'm going to copy the email address from the client. Copy email address. That's because, as you'll recall, we're using an alias for the client so that we can control the entire process. Where we did not use an alias and use the client's email address, then the client would be able to log in and complete the deep dive analysis. So I'm going to click on Invite to Unlock. I could also, clicking back here, click Start the Deep Dive Analysis. Same, takes us to exactly the same location. Here we are, Janice Strong. The assigned advisor is George Salmon. Within large organizations, we could change which advisor was going to do this work. For example, if I were the agency administrator and I wanted to assign this to one of my colleagues, 2 choices. We can send an email invitation to the client, and the client could start the deep dive analysis, or we can register for the client and complete the deep dive analysis on this computer. And that's the option we're going to use today. I'll click that radio button, register for client. I'm getting a warning asking if I'm sure I want to create an account because it may carry a financial obligation. As I have a growth consultant level of registration, I have a growth consultant account, I have unlimited access to the system, and therefore there are no additional charges. I'll simply click OK, and here we are. We have Janice's name automatically populated. It's populated that email address that we saw with the alias. Um, Ladies and gentlemen, if we had used the client's email address to discover, this is where we would enter a new email address with an alias that is your Gmail address plus alias. We use the client's last name as a convention. You can use anything you want plus anything you want at your Gmail or G Suite account. Okay, and then the password. I use my standard CoreValue password for my own sanity's sake. We click continue, and here we are. We're inside the deep dive analysis. Barry, anything you'd like to add before we get cracking here?
No, I think we're moving along.
Excellent. So Barry is playing the role of Janice's advisor, and we're going to talk through. I actually just did this the other day with a certified exit planner, an EPI member who's a financial planner out of Pittsburgh, and we did this together for real with a client, in a commercial sense, with a client company, and did it over Zoom and had a terrific experience. So Barry, we could also change the fundamentals here. I'll click on fundamentals, and we can go in and change several parameters, including revenue and profit for this client. So I'm going to click resume the assessment. If you wanted to do that at this time, say for example, when you did discover, the client said, "Oh, I think our EBITDA numbers or our net income numbers, $2 million." They come back and say, "I misremembered. It's actually $1 million." We could change that here very simply.
So this is the only place in which you can change the revenue and profit numbers
during the deep dive analysis. After the deep dive analysis, we can go in and change it also. But this is where you would change it at the beginning of or during the deep dive analysis. Does that make sense, Barry?
Yep.
Okay. Resume assessment, and here we go. So you can also you can do these in any order you want. Typically, and what we recommend is that we do a health scan for the entire business. So start with growth, work through the market drivers, work through the 9 operational drivers, through innovation, finish the engagement. And as you'll see, when we finish this series, we will close the computer and we'll walk through the best practice there. But here we're going to start with growth and go through it. Okay, we could start with the senior management if we wanted. We're going to start with growth and away we go. So Barry, you'll remember from Discover that the best practice is to have a history of consistent growth greater than your competitors, coupled with projected future revenue growth above the market's rate. And the system is telling us our original score was a 5. We'll refine the score by evaluating each of the sub-drivers, okay, the components of growth in turn. So we have, you can either navigate by clicking on the link or on the forward button. I'll do it the old-fashioned way, click on the forward button. And so we're going to get into company growth. I'm going to go back one. Well, we're going to go through company growth. And there are 3 subdrivers, and we'll see where we are in these radio buttons. Not so important when you have 3, a little more so in these operational drivers where you have up to 8 subdrivers. So this sounds very much like the original question. That's not always the case, but can you demonstrate quantifiable and historic growth greater than your competitors and substantiate, right? Demonstrate, substantiate growth projections greater than the industry's rate. You'll notice that the system's getting us to actually to say we can document these areas, that we have a process in each of these areas. So Barry, with Janice, what do you think? Where do you think Janice is on rating these?
Probably pretty sure we can, but we can't. But maybe missing some documentation.
Okay, great.
This question really asks you to understand what the industry growth looks like as well.
That's correct. That's correct. And have they correctly identified their competitors? Now, there are 2. We have a fork in the road here. If we think we're going to go through this in several sessions with the client, which actually Barry does, then we can get into a more detailed conversation here about what information the company actually has. If you're trying to get through the deep dive analysis in a single sitting in an hour or two, we did the gentleman I mentioned in Pittsburgh. We completed the deep dive analysis in just a shade over an hour. 2 hours should be largely enough. If we don't get into detailed conversation about the value drivers, Barry tends to do these. Barry, you want to comment on how you like to use the deep dive analysis?
Well, I make it I have more than one meeting with the client, and oftentimes I'll have their management team involved in the conversation, or I'll interview their management team separately, if they're big enough to have somebody in charge of sales and marketing and somebody in charge of operations. But I usually like to have the owner involved, because they get a real good understanding of their business that they may not have.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a great way to go about it. And I've heard that from some of your colleagues as well. And we have at least one customer who uses the deep dive analysis as the script, if you will, for a day and a half off-site executive retreat, and they go through this the deep dive analysis with in great detail, discussing each of the growth and equity value drivers. Okay, maybe missing some documentation. The other comment is, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of people don't understand who their true competition is. I'll use CoreValue as an example. Our biggest competition is what non-users are doing today with spreadsheets and templates and Word documents, Google documents. That's our biggest competition. Who knew that yellow cabs would be put out of business by little electric scooters? Well, their competition is a little electric scooter. Who'd have thunk it? All right, I'll click forward. Second so we have company. Now we have industry growth. Your company can clearly document the growth of its industry, broad category, within its niche. A niche is key here. And again, we're talking about documenting. How's Janice doing?
I think so.
Think so. Forward. Can the company articulate why its products and services will continue to effectively provide for and service future growth?
I could put something out, could pull something out of the head if needed.
Okay. Now, if I'm going to buy this company, I want to understand why they're not at risk going into the future. That's from a transaction perspective. If we're thinking from a growth perspective, if we're trying to help this client create a launch pad for growth, this answer right here has highlighted a specific project through which we can help our client, guide our client, and create this document, a critical piece. So we've gone through the three, and what we know is we've gained 0.4 of a point. So we moved from a 5 to a 5.4. Not a spectacular jump, but we're starting to really understand where the company is. You'll see a check mark up here because it's now been scored. I'll click the forward button and we move, as you'll see from the gray highlight, into market size, large potential market. And we want to know if the market supports significant growth of the business. For its sub-drivers, market size, niche clarity, competitive monitoring, and future market growth. Now you can see that this is a logical continuation of the previous set of questions. These are gears in the business engine, and we are going to analyze how strong each of the gears are, but also, as you see here, how well they work together. We're picking up on that concept of market, of niche, of monitoring the competition. All right, so I'll click the forward button. And is there a large market for products or services? And can the company, does the company have a complete written documentation and up-to-date research to substantiate the size of the current market?
Well, this particular market is huge, but the company does not have the documentation to support it. It's available
So
if they don't have it. So where does that fit in?
um, we're pretty sure we have a big market, but we need to find documentation. And this is how much of the market can we reach. So I often use the analogy of a company that makes bread, a commercial bakery, and a commercial. All over the planet we eat bread. But how much of that market could this company um, serve? This happens. Janice Strong runs Strong Distributors. It's a distribution company. Distribution is a global industry. However, how much of it can she actually serve? And so we're highlighting right here. Have you guys even thought about the market you can reach and how you're going to penetrate to become the dominant player, which is the next value driver? So, do you think this answer is puts Janice in the right basket?
Well, actually, Janice is in the immediate market, meaning the locale that she's located in. She's one of the larger players in that market, and she knows that because she has a niche in that market.
Okay. Well, let's go and look at niche, and we can. By the way, we can come back. As I said, this is a health scan of the business. We can come back and change this answer later. So, do you think this is a correct, or should we be up on the big sign? We have some documentation.
I think maybe our market is on the big side.
Okay, great.
We move it up there.
Okay, terrific. Let's get into niche. You have research and documentation. You see, again, guys, saying that you have it isn't good enough. And you have documentation on your company's market niche by product or service line.
We don't have, well, we have some documentation.
Okay.
Can't say that we don't have any. We have some.
Okay. Terrific. Click forward. Are they monitoring the competition? Do you have a system or process in place to monitor significant competitors and new entrants into your market? What's going to threaten your ability to compete?
So what do you mean by monitor here, George?
So is somebody tasked with, for example, we have a process. I'll use CoreValue as an example. We have a process and a business consulting system, and we monitor on an ongoing basis. We use clipping services. We go out, from things we hear. In fact, I heard of a company that's not a competitor, but that's interesting. That's in our space today. So we have a process. Everyone in the company is under a standing order to, when they hear of a competitor like that, they are to email it to me, and then I distribute it. And we have our ear to the rail. Who's coming into the space? What kind of innovation are they bringing? Do we understand who else is playing from? And not only direct competitors, but perceived competitors. For example, ProfitSense is perceived as a competitor. They're not. It's a great piece of software, but it's not competitive with what we do. Or BizEquity, which is a valuation software, which calculates a value, but isn't a direct competitor to what CoreValue does. So we have our ear to the rail, and it's written. People understand. It's part of their training when they come on board. It's discussed openly within the company. So that's what I'm referring to.
So I would say that we don't have a formal process, but we do monitor competitive entrants.
Okay, great. Future market growth. Can they document through research or other methods growth trends in the market and how the company will take advantage of those trends? This is a toughie.
We don't do a lot of research.
You know what? I haven't gone in and pulled the analytics on this specific question, but my gut tells me, and Barry, I'd love to hear your thought. How many clients do you think that have this kind of documentation?
Very few.
Yeah, very, very few. And now we're getting down into the nuance. And how do we put together, if I think in terms of a transaction, how do we put together those last few pieces that might get us that extra turn or tip the negotiation in our favor? Um, Now, the client thought that they came in and said, we have a huge market. Now we've taken them from a 10 to a 3.5, right? Because they can't really substantiate and document their market. So 6.5, a loss is 6.5.
So
More.
the
Go ahead.
George,
All right. Yeah,
the key in those particular questions is the documentation.
exactly right. And this is where we're moving, Barry, from what people perceive as a qualitative analysis into a quantitative analysis. Can you prove it out? And this is the critical area. You know, well-run companies will be able to prove this stuff out. And I didn't say this earlier, but this is a place where we're going to want to make sure that we use, if we have to choose between you know the top question and the next one down, and there's a debate. Let's be conservative and assume that we're on the next rung, that we're going to take the lower one. Let's not be optimistic and say, oh yeah, we're great, because there you're gonna sort of falsely weight your score up, and we need to make sure, you know, it's no problem to come back and change the answer later. But you know, when you have your hand on the documentation, you say, yeah, I think this is satisfactory. I think this serves the required purpose. Then we can go and say, good, we're good to go. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Dominant market share. This is an interesting area because if we're, for example, going into a transaction, if I'm the buyer, I'm thrilled if you have dominant market share. That means that there's, you know, you're the big dog on the block. You have at least the perceived competitive advantage. If I'm trying to grow the company, then this question may not have that much weight. But let's walk through it. If I'm trying to make the company easier to run, this also may not be that high priority. We're still going to score it when we're doing the complete scan. So the goal in Discover was to have the highest percentage of the available market relative to its competitors, like within our reach, within our geographical reach. You know, are we the biggest dog on the porch? There are three indicators of dominant market share: market definition, dominant market position, and market communication. Let's jump into them. Can you clearly define and quantify your market by product, service, region, or other factors? And there are hints you've noticed as we go through. The hint here is when thinking about your market, it's important to find your market based on either its relevant geography, if your business is local, or by product or service, it's your customers span a very large geography. So can we define and quantify a market by product, service, region, or other factors?
This question is a pretty high bar.
Yep.
So I would say that she can define her market, but does not have the data to quantify it.
Got it. And I'll use CoreValue as an example. Again, we do eat our own dog food, and we do use the software. You know, we have, and you'll hear me say it, and I think it's written in our mission statement. There are 1.5 million business advisors or business and personal advisors in our target market. You have 600,000 management consultants, 400 and tall change CPAs. You have a little under 400,000 personal advisors, and then a smattering of you know, true consulting, fractional CFOs, marketing consultants, et cetera, that would not fall into the management consultant category. So that's 1.5 million people. And now we're going to get into, you know, that once we understand that as a company, we can understand how to talk to management consultants, CPAs, what pressures are on management consultants, what pressures are on CPAs, why would they listen to us? Why would personal advisors and financial planners listen to us? Why do we help them answer their why. So it's a very important thing to have because it's going to inform product. We're going to get into product differentiation here in a few minutes. It's going to what products and services do you offer? How do you talk about them? Where do you market? What's sales going to be saying to them, and on and on and on. So yes, we can define our market. I'll click forward. Your company is the dominant competitor in the market and can quantify its position in the market relative to all significant competitors. So now we're going to assume that we understand who our competitors truly are. And we can quantify that we're the dominant competitor.
Well, this is an interesting question in the sense of the word quantify its position.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we're dealing with privately held companies, to find out what the competitors are doing is often difficult.
That is true. And we sometimes in this market, and it depends on how much the client's willing to invest, we might be able to get some high level data. And a great place to call, I can't stress it enough, we talk about this in the Business Advisor Bootcamp, is industry associations. You pick up the phone and call them, and the amount of information you can get, and their willingness to help is terrific. I've never had a bad experience making those calls. So
I would say that we're pretty sure we're one of the top players, but we don't have all the data.
Okay. Another great place to call is if you have someone in your referral network or on your staff who is a valuator. They have access to data sets that will help us start either specifically identifying this information or teasing it out. And there's a great way to get that information as well.
There's also industry reports on every industry.
Absolutely. Are you referring to like IBIS reports?
IBIS reports, and there's some other, don't remember what they are, but some other research companies that will provide you with a lot of ratio data and other information.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And this is all information that the client may be at a bit of a loss to find, and for which we can be the hero at the table and get the information. And often you'll often get the wow, I didn't know that from your client, because they're off every day, fighting the dragons, and so. Dominant market share, market communication. Can you clearly communicate outward, right? These are market drivers. Can you clearly communicate why your company will either retain its dominant market share or communicate how it will attain a dominant market share? If I'm looking to, again, I'm going to focus on transition. This is something we're going to want to communicate to a buyer. Or if I'm thinking in terms of growth, this is something, this could be aspirational. Making the company easier to run, perhaps. This is not as high a priority. We're still going to score it, right? Where is the company? Because it's a gear in the business engine. So can they articulate 3 reasons, 2 reasons, 1 reason, or no?
There's a couple of reasons.
Okay. Terrific. So we've added 2.5 points. We were a 3. We've gone to a 5.5. Okay, now into one of my editorialized, one of my personal favorites, recurring revenue. What a fascinating growth driver, a fascinating value driver. And what you hear from clients, the range of ways in which they create recurring revenue is really astonishing. People are pretty inventive. One of my favorites is we're working with one of your colleagues, Barry, down in New York City. His client is a household name chef who has a series of 6 restaurants in Manhattan and the boroughs out onto Long Island. And I quipped, well, they must not have, they must be pretty weak in recurring revenue. And he said, no, they have actually figured out how to use, they look at their credit card data to know who's coming to the restaurants, when, they're looking at behaviors there. They're using things like frequent dining cards, email promotions out to these people. People will sign up when they register, for example, on Open Table. They're getting contact information. They can now mark it out to them. They're sending out specials. They have events, and they're also using parking's very restricted in a lot of metros. They are using valet vouchers to get people to come to the restaurant, because people are already like, well, it's going to be $150, $200 for dinner, but I'm not spending $25 on parking. And that is something for which the restaurant gives up very little margin, very little revenue, because they use an outside vendor. But anyhow, I think it's terrific. So recurring revenue, this does not have to be, when it says contractually committed, let's think a bit larger than that. They do not need to be contractually committed. This is how confident can you be that in your future revenue? Oh, listen, 40% of our customers come back. I use the example of our plowing service. It's a pretty big company here regionally. I don't call them ever. It snows, they show up. It snows again, they show up again. The only time they hear from me is if they don't show up and I'm at 2:00 in the afternoon wondering what the heck I'm going to be able to get out of the driveway. I live in northern New England. We get a lot of snow and ice. So it doesn't have to be contractually committed per se, although that is the gold standard. All right. Recurring revenue is scored a 3. Barry, any comments here before we get into it?
The word contractually. You clarified that word. I agree. You could track a lot of different metrics to understand what your revenue would be in the following year.
Mm-hmm.
And I contend that almost every company can develop some type of a plan to keep their customers coming back and keep them committed to your product line.
That's right. That's right. And it's interesting. We are moving from annual subscriptions. We've added the ability to subscribe to CoreValue monthly. Now that is significantly more costly for the customer, but that also puts pressure on us to make sure that people are happy. They're getting value out of the system. Now we always take that very seriously. Always have. We have a very high renewal rate. However, it puts even more pressure on us to make sure that this little baby right here, customer satisfaction, remains very high. So we're not going to do anything. We're not doing anything new to make sure that those future revenues aren't at risk. But what we are doing is being very diligent in watching that people are getting the customer success support that we promise, and for which I think we're very well reputed. So, all right, let's get into contracts. You have formal gold standard. You have formal written contracts that provide for consistent revenue. And here we go. We have contracts for future revenue that represents over 75%, that represents roughly half. We have some customer contracts. We could have contracts, but don't bother. And we wish we had contracts or some guarantee of future orders. I'm gonna stay up on my soapbox, Barry. When we think in terms of the 3 dimensions of growth and of a company of this foundation for growth, this first set of work that we're going to do with a client to create predictable profits and cash flow, this is an area that is a very high priority to creating predictable profits and cash flow. And whether it's contracts or other means of ensuring, of having a high confidence that people are going to come back, this is critical work, especially if you're getting involved in growth consulting and you want to make sure that your client has the cash coming in month after month after month to fund that growth, because growth, as I say almost every day, growth is expensive. And you're having to put bets down in advance of revenues coming in, and that needs to come either out of organic cash flow or out of debt, or possibly out of an equity raise. So if it's going to be debt or equity, we want to make sure that we can service that debt if it's going to be equity, we want to make sure we're getting that at as high a multiple as possible. And this right here gives a lot of comfort to lenders and or equity partners.
Well, George, if we're talking about contracts or assurances, I think the word assurances really is the key.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, contracts, you're right, that's the gold standard. But if you're a distribution company and there's competition, you can be assured that they come back to you based on other factors, such as the customer satisfaction. So I would say that in this particular case, that yes, we have customer contracts or we have assurances they will be coming back to us
Okay.
for half of
For half? Okay.
at least half.
Terrific. Terrific. And by the way, this can be simply be a matter of, well, I'll dip into financial. This can be a matter of having of tracking your customers over time and saying, well, listen, the typical, being able to say, well, the typical customer comes on board at X dollars for Y period. And if you have those two metrics and you can prove it, you have it documented over time, then I as an acquirer, I as a lender, or I as the CEO who's trying to make sure that I'm making good strategic decisions, that I'm placing bets that I can back with cash flow. That's the kind of information that's critical. Okay, I think I've whipped that horse enough. Customer mix. Your company's customer base includes a mix of new, developing, and long-term customers. Wow, intersection with satisfaction and marketing. New, developing, and long-term customers.
Oh, I see. Our customer base is always new and developing. It's the first one.
Okay. So we have
We have a very strong customer base.
okay, great. So this is the correct.
Yes.
Okay, terrific. Customer retention. You can articulate why customers will continue to purchase from your company. You can articulate 3, 2, 1, or no.
I would say at least 2 reasons.
Okay. And I'll click forward and that'll finish scoring recurring revenue. So we've gained 4.4. They originally scored a 3. You ended up with a derived score of 7.4 based on the underlying indicators. So that's great. We want, ladies and gentlemen, for things that are going to be a high priority, and recurring revenue is a high priority for most companies. We want to have a 7 or higher. Think of a 7 as a C, right? A 70%. We're 74% confident in our ability to generate recurring revenue. Good. That's going to help. That helps people sleep at night. It helps people place bets on the future. I'm going to click forward on barriers to entry. I'm an attorney by training. This one is near and dear to my heart. So there are significant obstacles facing a new entrant into your company's market. Original score was a 5. There are 4 sub-drivers or indicators. Barrier to entry types: legal, market, and capital. So the first one, you have significant obstacles facing a new entrant into the market, including legal, market, and or capital barriers. A general question that anticipates the next 3.
I'd say there are notable barriers.
Okay. So let's now in the next 3, and this is not unique, but this shows how the next drivers kind of shore up the first question. Does the company have well-organized and documented agreements, licenses, and or contracts, plus patents, trademarks, copyrights that clearly define the protection and the extent of your protection? This protection may include regulatory protection.
Oh, we have all our legal documentation together.
Okay, great.
We're all over it.
Excellent. Market barriers. Does the company have market barrier documentation that includes how it created these market barriers and will protect them? Examples include brands, licenses, trade secrets, exclusive agreements, location, etc. You see how we're getting into, we were sort of going back into recurring revenue, we're dipping into legal, and we're dipping into brand. So do they have documentation, some, or don't have any?
Oh, we have some.
Okay. Click forward. And we're on the last, you see the last radio button is green. Your company has documented all aspects of capital required for new entries into the marketplace. And what this really is going to here, and I've actually been involved in decisions in my career that went straight down these lines. Is it cheaper to buy you or to develop a new you? Is kind of how this question plays out in my mind. Barry, how does this question, do you think that's a fair description of this, of what this question is really getting at?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
It's interesting you're saying, is it cheaper to buy me than to compete with us or develop something to compete with us?
Yep.
Um, and that really depends on a lot of the other value drivers. They're all tied together.
Yes.
So this is, answering this question just based on money.
Well, it may not be just based on money,
Yeah.
but it's the capital required for new entries into the market. And there's also the value of time, right?
The value of time. So I would say that it's cheaper to buy us than to compete with us.
That's a good thing. Now, can Janice document that though? If you wanted to start a distribution company that was doing $50 million a year, you would need to, here are the capital investments you'd have to make.
I'm not sure she can document it.
Okay. And it's not something that a lot of companies think about. I mean, I can tell you within about $100,000 how much we invested, how much we've invested to date in developing our software and our market, and a lot of that is documented. But if they have gone through even a Series A round of investment, then they're going to have some of this stuff documented. But Janice does not have this documented, so I'm going to click forward, and they've added a 1.4 points. They were a 5, they're now a 6.4, 64% confidence on barriers to entry. And we'll do, Barry, we are right on schedule. We'll score product differentiation, and so that has 3 sub-drivers. And once we score product differentiation, we'll make a few comments, and we're right on pace to do the next series when we get together next. So best practice at the discover level, you remember you have a product or service with unique characteristics that provide a competitive advantage. And so let's go. And by the way, you can have your discover printed out, and it's a good idea to have the discover report printed out along with the answers they provided. You can get that very easily. It's a control P out of the discover. Holding down the control button and hitting P is how to print. You can have those with you for reference when you're doing the deep dive analysis. It's really not that important, but it's not bad to have it in the room. So, proof of differentiation, product service life cycle, and financial differentiation. And we're going to have a little conversation on a couple of these. So, can Janice quantify how the uniqueness of her company's products and services gives her a competitive advantage in a significant market or customer segment? We could quantify the uniqueness, articulate, not really sure. We're commoditized.
Not really sure. She has a business where there's it's a very specialized product. So there's not a lot of people a lot of other companies in her niche. I know we're going to get to the question about niche, but she's definitely in a niche. Um, so there's, the the, the companies that sell a lot of different products also sell hers, but she has a specific niche that not many other people have.
Got it. And she has strong repeat customers, right?
Yes.
So, and it could be now we may tease this out. Why is that? And we can tease this out when we get into the executable growth plan. We will tease out, okay, people are coming back. Why is that? Product service life cycle. You can articulate where the products are within in their life cycle and show plans to keep, replace, or upgrade the products and services the market continues to evolve. And there are things that I'll speak from a software development perspective, things that we are bringing to market routinely, whether they're new techniques, new thinking, most recently the 3 dimensions of growth and how to apply core value in client engagements. There are some specific enhancements to the software that are coming down. We just went through, and believe me, it was carefully documented, a complete upgrade of the stack to bring it in line with the most current Ruby standards. And those standards change over time, just in the way that you download updates to your Microsoft or your Google or Mac device. That's happening behind the scenes with the literally thousands of other pieces of code that are out there that are provided by outside by third-party vendors, and they all have to comply with standards. That's why things like software continue to work year after year, even though the network is evolving and the software behind it is evolving. So well-documented plans for all products or services. Some plans, we have a pretty good idea. We're not sure, or we really don't know.
I think we're not sure.
Not sure. Gosh, and we could talk about this product and service lifecycle in terms of when I think in terms of CPAs and their services out to the market under a lot of pressure at the moment. And I think in terms of valuators and what they're facing from the competition they face, even from perceived competitors like Biz Equity. We could talk at length about why that isn't really a competition, and answers that people have to their services, adding additional services. We have a complete webinar on that. Adding things like core value to a CPA practice, adding exit planning to a CPA practice or a financial practice. There are a lot of ways to make sure that you remain relevant with your customers, and that's that we're getting into. Have you done that? Do you analyze this about the business on an ongoing basis, and what are your plans for the future? So I'll click on the next button, and then financial differentiation. Do you have quantitative proof of differentiation by products or service and can show a pricing and or cost advantage over the competition? For example, can the company demand a higher market price for comparable products or services at a cost that results in superior gross margins? And we're going to talk about margins in detail in our next session, but quantitative proof of differentiation.
I think our margins are slightly better than the industry average.
Okay, great. Again, what a great analysis to help the client have, especially if they're not making as much money as if they come to find out you may perceive you're making as much money as the competition, or perceive that you're out competing. But when we do an apples to apples conservative comparison, and there's data out there, where are we really now? Again, let's get into where's the priority. Is this financial differentiation a high priority, or just simply a priority, or a lower priority for the client? It's going to fit in one of those 3 buckets. And if I'm looking to grow the business, margin becomes very important. Go ahead, Barry.
And then going back to your the question on getting industry comparisons,
Hmm.
um, you can prove that your gross margins are higher than the industry.
Sure.
I mean, although you may not be exactly correct, at least you have some indication if that's the case.
Sure. And there are companies out there. I'm thinking specifically of companies like Terry Lammer's CEO to CEO, who specialize in looking at ratios within industries, financial ratios, and understanding very clearly where your ratios should be compared compared to your peers. And there's software such as Profit Sense that can also help tease out those ratios on an industry basis. So there are a lot of ways to develop this information, or there are several ways to develop this information. This is obviously, you can see how long Barry and I are talking about this. This is important, and it's going to go straight into margin. Why can we charge a higher margin, or why can others charge a higher margin? We get into brand, um, customer satisfaction, etc. So I'll finish scoring differentiation. I'll click forward. And we've added 1.8 points out of 10. So we've gone from a 3 to a 4.8. So we're really sharpening our understanding. But a 48, before we start congratulating ourselves, is still a failing grade. We need, for product differentiation, if this is important for growth, if this is important for equity value, then getting this up to a 7 is very important, and that's in the executable growth plan. So Barry, we've just scored through product differentiation. Next time we get together, we can score the next six or more, and I think we're on a good pace to complete this series. Do you have any questions or comments before we wrap up for today?
No, I think my only comment is to look at the question when you think about what's being asked.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why I work with the client directly, to get them to query them further on each of these areas so that they really understand the question.
Absolutely. And sometimes when we're working with clients, the answer, our perception of the answer, or their perception at the discover level, is going to sort of crashes up on the rocks of reality. And what's fascinating to me is the difference. You have the same people being asked, about the same topics, and you sit down with a CEO and you do discover, and they say, oh yeah, our sales and marketing is terrific. Oh yeah, we have a completely differentiated product. It's absolutely unique. You sit down, you ask them like, okay, great. When you say that, can you explain why? Which is really what we're doing. Why? Can you document it? Can you show it to me? And now we start seeing in some instances that we lose ground, that perhaps we're not as confident as we should be. Or in some instances like here, we gain ground and we've moved from a 3 to a 4.8, but we still, if this is a high priority value driver, I'll beat that gong again. We need to get this up to a 7. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not part of the project of doing a deep dive analysis for which people are charging, for which your colleagues are charging between $4,500 and $10,000 today. That's part of the long-term engagement to say, all right, well, let's develop proof of product differentiation. And if we can't develop it, let's create it. Let's differentiate our product. Let's give ourselves a competitive advantage. Let's sit down with sales and say, hey, what are you hearing? Let's look at we've gone and looked at the competitors. What are others doing that from which we should be learning? So it's really a terrific way to power the right conversations with your clients.
And George, the documentation issue is a big deal because in due diligence, you will have to show that documentation.
Absolutely. That is exactly right. And someone's going to say, great, show me. You have someone sitting across the table with a checkbook that's trying, generally speaking, to write as small a check as possible. And you're sitting across the table saying, no, 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 we're not at 2 times earnings. We're 6 times earnings. But you have to be able to show them why. Without getting into strategic value, we have to be able to show them why. Why the heck would I write, would I put another zero on the end of this? Or would I, why would I write a bigger check? And that check comes down to confidence. Confidence is built on documentation. That's all there is to it. Um, so this is really fun, Barry. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
And we'll get together. I know we have another meeting, maybe as early as tomorrow.
I think it's tomorrow.
So, okay, I'm going to stop recording here.